terms of what happened last night and what happens going forward, let's just get your take first of all.
Well, I think it was a lot closer than Boris Johnson's allies had expected and, of course, hoped. Really, for a Prime Minister to carry on with 41% of his MPs having no confidence in him, I think will be quite difficult. And I think you're quite right to point to those by-elections. We've, to some extent, assumed that the Conservatives will lose both of those, but we shouldn't, as a result, minimise the impact, as you say, of losing those by-elections. They will, I think, worry many Conservative MPs who are sitting on majorities far smaller than, obviously, Neil Parish was. And they will worry a lot of Conservative MPs in the so-called Red Wall, these seats that were won from Labour after generations of being held by the Labour Party. I think the key metric for Conservative MPs, to be honest, is the opinion polls. They'll be looking at Boris Johnson's personal ratings and whether they plunge even further downwards than they have already. And, of course, they will be looking at the gap between them and the Labour Party. And if, as a result, in part of this confidence vote, that gap opens even wider, I think you will see Conservative rebels try and come back for more. We have a rule which says that there can be no confidence motion again within 12 months. But those rules can be changed very, very easily by the executive of the 1922 committee. And I think if pressure builds from Conservative MPs to have another shot at Johnson, it will be very, very difficult for the 1922 committee executive to resist that pressure.
Tim, every once in a while there is a leading figure in a generation in British politics on one side or t'other, and just looking at the Conservatives, the Robert Peels of this world, the Benjamin Disraelis, and more recent times, of course, the dominant figure that was Churchill, then Thatcher, and now Johnson. There doesn't appear to be anyone of that same calibre in terms of the view of the British population, the size of the personality, who could take over. Who would potentially be the people or the person who could challenge Boris Johnson?
Well, you're right to say that there isn't an obvious so-called big beast. I think it's fair to say, if you look back historically, that it wasn't always obvious at the time that someone who becomes iconic was going to be an icon. Margaret Thatcher actually is a very good example. When she stood against Ted Heath back in the mid-70s, not many people really gave her much of a chance. And it was only once she'd won and once she became Prime Minister that she became the figure that we all know today. I think in terms of who could replace Boris Johnson, well, there are some people in the cabinet who will have a go. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is one of them. Sajid Javid, who's the Health Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, and, of course, there is Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who has had, if you like, a good war in Ukraine and was one of the few ministers to emerge reasonably well out of the Afghanistan catastrophe. The Chancellor of the Exchequer may still feel he wants to have a shot, although he's been damaged quite recently. Or, of course, the Conservatives could go for a complete clean skin, somebody who hasn't been in Boris Johnson's government. Jeremy Hunt, who stood against him in 2019, is the obvious example. But there are some others, perhaps Tom Tugendhat, who is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I honestly don't think that the lack of an obvious successor or even iconic successor should put Conservative rebels off. If Boris Johnson seems to be leading them to almost certain defeat, then it's probably anyone but Boris